Tonight, let us walk into a season of hardship, a season when the sky feels heavier than usual, when familiar things disappear, and when the future becomes a dark road hidden by rain. Long ago, in a mountain village surrounded by cedar forests, there lived a merchant named Ren. For 15 years, he had worked before sunrise and long after sunset. He built his shop with his own hands. He carried sacks of rice across muddy roads. He traveled through winter storms. He missed festivals. He missed birthdays. He told himself that one day, when the business was secure, he would finally rest. One day, one day, one day. But life rarely waits for the day we imagine. It happened in the middle of the rainy season. The village slept beneath a sky without stars. Wind moved through the narrow streets like a restless spirit. Ren awoke to the sound of shouting. At first he thought it was a dream. Then came another voice, closer, louder. Fire! Ren, wake up! He rushed outside, and the night had become red. Flames climbed the wooden walls of his store. Sparks flew into the storm-dark sky. Neighbors formed a line from the well, passing buckets of water from hand to hand. Children cried. Dogs barked wildly. Rain fell. But not enough. Never enough. Ren ran toward the doorway. Two men seized his arms. "You can't go in," he struggled. Inside that building were his ledgers, his savings, his inventory, his future. Inside that building were 15 years of sacrifice. The roof groaned, then collapsed in a shower of sparks. The men tightened their grip as Ren fell to his knees. By dawn, nothing remained but blackened beams and drifting smoke. The rain had stopped. A thin mist rose from the ashes. Villagers stood silently around the ruins. No one knew what to say. One woman placed a blanket over Ren's shoulders. He did not notice. He stared at the smoking remains of the place that had once held his life together. Some losses arrive slowly. Others arrive in a single night. For several days, Ren moved through the village like a ghost. Creditors came. Suppliers demanded payment. Friends who once praised his success suddenly became difficult to find. Even his own relatives spoke in careful, disappointed voices. "You should have been more careful. Why wasn't the roof repaired? What will you do now?" He had no answer. At night he lay awake, listening to the wind. Every creak of wood sounded like another roof collapsing. Every shadow looked like smoke. His mind repeated the same questions endlessly. Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? How do I begin again? On the 7th night, unable to sleep, Ren walked beyond the village. The moon hid behind drifting clouds. The mountain path was wet and slippery. He did not know where he was going. He only knew he could no longer bear the walls of his empty house. After a long climb, he reached a narrow clearing. There, beneath a lone cedar tree, sat an old monk. A small lantern glowed beside him. The monk did not seem surprised, as if he had been expecting someone. Ren stopped several steps away. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved softly through the cedar branches. Finally, the monk asked, "What has been taken from you?" The question broke something open inside Ren. Words poured out like floodwater. His business, his savings, his reputation, his plans, his future. When he finished, the monk nodded gently, then asked, "And what remains?" Ren stared at him in disbelief. "Nothing remains." The monk lifted the lantern. Its small flame trembled in the wind, but did not go out. "If nothing remained, Who is speaking to me now? Ren opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since the fire clashed, he realized something strange. His store had burned, his money had vanished, his plans had collapsed. And yet, he was still breathing, still standing, still capable of hearing the wind in the cedar tree. The monk placed the lantern back on the ground. Difficult times do not ask whether we are ready. They arrive, but they also reveal something important. Ren looked at the old man. His eyes were tired, red from sleepless nights, filled with a grief he could not yet name. What do they reveal? The monk smiled softly. They reveal what cannot be burned. The lantern flickered. Far below, the village lights glowed faintly through the mist. Ren sank slowly onto the wet ground beneath the cedar tree. For the first time in 7 days, he stopped trying to solve his life. He simply sat, listening to the wind, listening to his own breathing, listening to the silence that remained after everything had fallen apart. And somewhere within that silence, the first lesson began. The bamboo survives the storm, not because it is stronger than the wind, but because it knows how to bend. Rain rested on the bamboo leaves. The valley was still. Somewhere beyond the mist, a single bird called once and fell silent. Ren followed the old monk down a narrow path behind the cedar tree. Neither of them spoke. The night of the fire had left his body exhausted, but his mind would not rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flames. Every time he opened them, he saw ashes. After a long walk, they reached a small field. Rows of bamboo stood beside a broken wooden fence. Several stalks had been bent almost to the ground by the storm. Ren looked at them. The wind was strong here. The monk nodded. He walked to one of the bent stalks and gently lifted it with both hands. Slowly, the bamboo rose upright again. Ren frowned. I thought it was ruined. The monk smiled faintly. Look closer. The stalk was wet, bent, scarred, but not broken. Nearby stood an old oak tree. One of its large branches lay split on the ground. The monk touched the fallen branch. The oak resisted. Then he placed his hand on the bamboo. The bamboo bowed. Ren remained silent. The wind moved softly through the field. The bamboo swayed. The broken branch did not. After a while, the monk asked, when the fire came, what did you do? I fought it. And when the roof collapsed, Ren lowered his eyes. I kept trying to save what was already lost. The monk nodded gently. Many people become like the oak. They believe strength means refusing to bend. He looked toward the bamboo field. But difficult times do not always ask us to be strong. Sometimes they ask us to remain unbroken. Ren felt a quiet resistance inside his chest. If I bend, he said, haven't I failed? The monk picked up a fallen bamboo leaf. It had been carried by the storm, yet it was still green. Does this leaf look ashamed? Ren shook his head. No. Then why are you? The question settled between them. For a long moment, Ren had no answer. He thought of the creditors, the whispers in the village, the disappointment in his relatives' voices. He had believed that losing his business meant losing himself. But standing among the bamboo, he began to see another possibility. A bent stalk was not a dead stalk. The monk sat down on a flat stone. When winter comes, he said, the bamboo does not argue with the snow. When the wind arrives, it does not demand calm skies. It simply moves. He looked at Ren. Can you do the same? Ren stared at the wet earth. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to sound wise. Instead, he answered honestly, "I don't know." The monk smiled. "Good. An honest heart learns faster than a proud one." Clouds slowly drifted apart. A pale line of morning light appeared above the mountains. For the first time in many days, Ren noticed the sky. It had not become bright all at once. It was changing gradually, almost invisibly. The monk stood. "Come, there is more to see. Tonight, imagine your own storm. Perhaps it is a loss, a disappointment, a fear that has been following you for many nights. Notice how tightly the heart wants to resist. Notice how exhausting that resistance can become. The bamboo does not survive because the wind is gentle. It survives because it does not mistake bending for defeat." As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped fighting the storm for a moment? What would happen if I simply allowed myself to be carried through it? Perhaps softness is not weakness. Perhaps it is the quiet wisdom that keeps the heart from breaking. By midday, the rain had stopped. Clouds drifted slowly across the mountains. Water still clung to the tall grass beside the path. Ren followed the monk through a small valley where no houses stood. Only the sound of their footsteps moved through the quiet. At the end of the valley stood an old granary. Its wooden doors hung slightly open. One wall leaned inward from age. Moss had begun climbing the lower beams. Ren looked around. "No one uses this place anymore?" The monk shook his head. "Not for many years." Inside, the room was nearly empty. Dust floated through thin shafts of sunlight. In one corner sat a single clay jar. The monk lifted the lid. A few grains of rice remained at the bottom. Ren stared at them. "Is this the lesson?" The monk did not answer. Instead, he sat beside the jar and waited. After a while, Ren spoke again. "Whoever owned this granary must have lost everything." The monk nodded. "Perhaps. Then why keep the jar?" The monk picked up a single grain of rice between his fingers. "Why do you think?" Ren frowned. He looked around the empty building. Broken shelves, faded rope, cracked floorboards. Nothing here seemed worth keeping. "I don't know," he admitted. The monk held up the grain of rice. "This is enough to remember." Ren looked confused. The monk continued. "Long ago, a family stored their harvest here. Good years filled every corner. Then came drought. Then sickness. Then another winter." He placed the grain gently back into the jar. In the end, only a few grains remained. "And that was enough?" Ren asked. The monk smiled faintly. "Enough for what?" Silence settled over the granary. A breeze moved through the open doorway. Dust swirled briefly, then became still again. Ren suddenly thought of his own store. He remembered the shelves he had built, the ledgers he had carefully kept, the coins he had counted late into the night, all gone, and since the fire, he had spoken as though nothing remained. The monk looked at him quietly. "Tell me, Ren, when your store burned, did your honesty burn?" Ren blinked. "No." "Did your ability to work burn?" "No." "Did your kindness burn?" Ren hesitated. "I don't think so." The monk nodded. "Then perhaps the granary is not as empty as you imagine." For a long moment, Ren said nothing. He realized that ever since the fire, he had measured himself only by what he had lost: money, goods, reputation, plans. He had never stopped to ask what still remained inside him. The monk stood and walked toward the doorway. Outside, Sunlight touched the wet valley. Many people, he said softly, believe they are poor because their granary is empty. He looked back at Ren. But some granaries are full while the heart is starving. Ren lowered his eyes. He thought of the years before the fire. How often had he postponed rest? How often had he ignored the mountains, the river, the evening sky? His store had been full, yet his life had often felt hurried and hollow. The monk picked up the clay jar. He placed it gently in Ren's hands. It was lighter than expected. What do you feel? Almost nothing. Exactly. The monk smiled. A few grains cannot feed a village, but they can begin a new harvest. Ren looked down into the jar. The rice at the bottom seemed insignificant. Yet suddenly he understood. The lesson was not about abundance. It was about possibility. The monk stepped outside. Come. The day is not finished. Tonight, imagine an old granary standing quietly in the mountains. Its shelves are empty. Its walls are worn. Only a few grains of rice remain. Many of us look at our difficult seasons the same way. We count what is missing. We count what was taken. We count what no longer fills the shelves of our lives. But the Buddha often invited people to look deeper, not only at what has disappeared, but at what still remains. Your breath, your capacity to love, your ability to begin again, your courage to take one more step. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what few grains still remain in my own granary? Perhaps they are enough to start a new season. By evening, they reached a small village at the foot of the mountain. Thin smoke rose from a few chimneys. The scent of wet earth and burning cedar drifted through the narrow lanes. Children had already gone indoors. Only the soft sound of rainwater dripping from the eaves remained. The monk stopped before a pottery workshop. Inside, an old potter sat beside a low table. A single oil lamp illuminated the room. Bowls, cups, and teapots lined the shelves. Some were smooth and perfect. Others carried small marks left by the fire. The potter bowed. You have arrived late. The monk smiled. The mountain kept us. Ren's eyes wandered across the workshop. Near the lamp sat a bowl with a long crack running from the rim to the base. It had been carefully repaired with a thin line of gold. Why keep a broken bowl? Ren asked. The potter did not answer immediately. He poured warm tea into the bowl. Ren expected it to leak. It did not. The old man slid it gently across the table. Drink. Ren hesitated, then lifted the bowl with both hands. The crack was visible beneath his fingers, yet the tea remained inside. It still works, he said. The potter nodded. So do many things that have been broken. Silence settled over the room. The lamp flickered softly. Rain tapped against the wooden roof. After a while, the potter spoke. This bowl belonged to my wife. Ren looked up. One winter, she dropped it. She cried because it was her favorite. I repaired it. The old man traced the golden line with one finger. After that, she loved it even more. Ren frowned slightly. Because it was repaired? The potter smiled. Because it had survived. Those words lingered in the warm air. Ren thought of the fire. He thought of the shame he carried, the feeling that his life had become damaged beyond repair. The monk looked at him quietly. What do you see when you look at this bowl? Ren answered honestly. A crack. The monk nodded. And what does the potter see? Ren glanced toward the old man. The potter was smiling at the bowl as though greeting an old friend. A story, Ren whispered. The monk's eyes softened. Yes. The potter refilled the bowl. Steam rose slowly between them. People often hide their cracks, he said. They fear being seen. He lifted the bowl toward the lamp. The golden line caught the light. But the places that have been repaired are often the places that become strongest. Ren lowered his eyes. For the first time since the fire, he wondered whether his suffering might someday become something other than shame. Not today, not tomorrow, but perhaps one day. The monk asked quietly, "If your store had never burned, would you have climbed the mountain?" Ren was silent. "Would you have sat beneath the cedar tree?" Silence. "Would you have seen the bamboo?" Ren slowly shook his head. The monk nodded. "Some cracks appear so that a different path can enter." Outside, the rain began to ease. A cool breeze drifted through the doorway. The potter carefully placed the repaired bowl back upon the table. Its golden scar glowed softly in the lamplight. Not hidden, not erased. Honored. Ren looked at it for a long time. Then he bowed slightly toward the old potter. "Thank you." The potter smiled. "For what?" Ren touched the warm bowl one last time. "For showing me that broken is not the same as useless." Tonight, imagine holding that cracked bowl in your hands. Feel the warmth of the tea. Trace the golden line that once was a break. Many of us carry hidden cracks. A loss, a disappointment, a betrayal, a season that changed us forever. We often believe those cracks make us less valuable. Yet the Buddha taught that suffering can become a doorway to wisdom, not because pain is pleasant, but because it can soften the heart and deepen our understanding of others. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what if the parts of me that feel broken are also the parts that have learned compassion? What if healing does not mean becoming the person I was before? What if it means becoming someone gentler, wiser, and more awake? Like the bowl on the potter's table, your story may still hold warmth. Before dawn, the valley disappeared. Thick white fog covered the mountain road. The trees were only shadows. The rocks beneath their feet emerged and vanished again with every step. Ren pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. The air felt cold and damp. "Can you still see the path?" he asked. The monk looked ahead. Only a little. They continued walking. Each step revealed only the next few feet of ground. Nothing beyond that. No valley, no village, no destination, only fog. After a while, Ren stopped. "What if we are going the wrong way?" The monk did not turn around. "What if we are?" Ren frowned. "Shouldn't we wait until the fog clears?" The monk smiled faintly. "If we waited for perfect clarity, we might never leave the mountain." A gust of wind moved through the valley. The fog swirled for a moment, revealing a narrow stretch of path ahead. Then it closed again. The monk pointed forward. "Did you see that?" "Yes." "Was it enough?" Ren hesitated. "Enough for a few more steps." The monk nodded. "Then take them." They walked on. Ren noticed something strange. Whenever he stared into the fog, trying to see the entire road, he became anxious. Whenever he focused only on the next step, his body relaxed. The mountain remained hidden, but the ground beneath his feet was real. After some time, they reached a small wooden bridge, crossing a stream. The water rushed unseen below them. Only its sound rose through the mist. Ren paused at the entrance. "I can't see the other side." The monk stepped onto the bridge. "Neither can I." He crossed slowly. One step, then another. The bridge creaked softly beneath him. When he reached the far side, his figure became a faint outline in the fog. "Come," he called gently. Ren took a deep breath. His heart beat faster. For a moment he imagined the bridge breaking, the stream below, the uncertainty ahead. Then he remembered the bamboo. He remembered the cracked bowl. He placed one foot on the bridge. It held. Another step, then another. When he reached the far side, the monk was waiting. What changed? Ren looked back at the bridge. Nothing. Then why were you afraid? Ren opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because he had been frightened by what he could not see. The monk picked up a small stone and dropped it into the stream. The sound echoed briefly through the fog. Most of life is like this valley, he said softly. We rarely see the entire road. We see enough for one step. Ren thought about his future, the debts, the burned store, the uncertainty waiting for him below the mountain. For days, he had demanded to know how everything would turn out. Now, standing in the fog, he realized he could not see even the next hour clearly. The monk looked at him. What is the next step? Ren answered slowly. Keep walking. Good. As morning passed, the fog gradually began to thin. First the nearest trees appeared, then the stream, then the outline of the valley. By midday, the sky above them was pale blue. The road they had feared was simply a road. Ren looked back toward the white mist still lingering behind them. I thought we were lost. The monk smiled. No, you were only unable to see far. For a long moment, Ren stood quietly. He realized that his life felt exactly the same. The future was hidden. But perhaps hidden did not mean hopeless. Perhaps it only meant that he was being asked to take the next step before seeing the entire path. Tonight, imagine yourself standing in that mountain fog. The road ahead is hidden. You cannot see the destination. You cannot see how everything will unfold. Many difficult seasons feel this way. We want certainty before we move. We want answers before we begin. Yet the Buddha often taught that wisdom grows through direct experience, not through complete control of the future. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what is the next honest step available to me right now? Not the entire journey, not the next year, only the next step. Like the bridge in the fog, it may be enough. By late afternoon, the forest grew quieter. The wind no longer moved through the trees as strongly as before. Sunlight filtered through the cedar branches in long golden beams. The mountain path narrowed, then disappeared beneath a carpet of fallen needles. The monk walked ahead without speaking. Ren followed. The lessons of the bamboo, the granary, and the fog still lingered in his mind. Yet beneath those lessons, another feeling remained, a question he had not spoken aloud. Why do difficult things happen at all? The question followed him like a shadow. Even if he learned to endure hardship, even if he learned to begin again, why must suffering exist in the first place? As evening approached, they arrived at a small temple hidden among the cedars. Its wooden gate stood open. A stone lantern rested beside the path. Wildflowers grew between ancient paving stones. The place felt peaceful, timeless, as though it had always existed. A man in simple grey robes was sweeping the courtyard. His movements were slow and unhurried. When he noticed the visitors, he bowed warmly. The old monk returned the bow. You are well. The grey-robed monk smiled. Today, yes. The two old men laughed softly, as though sharing a joke Ren could not yet understand. The resident monk invited them inside. They sat together on woven mats. Tea was served. Outside, a bell rang somewhere deep within the temple grounds. One gentle note, then silence. For a while, no one spoke. The tea steamed quietly between them. Finally, Ren asked, "How long have you lived here?" The grey-robed monk looked around the room. 3 years. Ren was surprised. The temple looked much older. What happened before that? The monk smiled, then looked toward the window, far beyond the trees, far beyond the mountains, as though remembering another place. There was another temple. The room grew quiet. It stood beside the sea. It was beautiful. There were gardens, ancient pine trees, a library filled with scrolls. His eyes softened. It took many years to build. Ren nodded. He understood that feeling. The feeling of giving years of your life to something. Then the monk added quietly, "One summer, a fire came." Ren froze. The monk continued, not dramatically, not sadly, simply as one might describe rain. The wind was strong. The flames spread quickly. By morning, everything was gone. The tea suddenly felt warmer in Ren's hands. The monk beside him had lost a temple, a real temple, a place devoted to prayer and peace. And yet, he spoke of it without bitterness. Ren could not help asking, "Weren't you angry?" The grey-robed monk thought for a moment. At first, a bird sang outside. Then silence returned. "I was angry. I was sad. I was confused." He smiled gently. "I was human." Something inside Ren relaxed. For days he had secretly believed that spiritual people somehow escaped suffering, that monks possessed a wisdom that protected them from loss. Now he saw something different. Wisdom did not prevent pain. It changed the way one carried it. The monk picked up his teacup. A small crack ran along one side, not enough to break it, only enough to remind someone that it was fragile. "I loved that temple," he said softly. "Very much." Ren nodded. "Then why aren't you still grieving?" The monk smiled. "Who says I am not?" Ren blinked. The old man looked toward the evening sky. "There are mornings when I still remember the library, the gardens, the sound of the sea." His eyes reflected the fading sunlight. "And, for a moment, I miss them." Then he took another sip of tea. "And then I noticed the cedar trees outside, the birds, the bell, the tea." He smiled. "This temple is here. The old one is not." The words settled gently into the room. The monk continued, "If I spend all my time mourning the temple that burned, I will miss the temple that remains." Silence. The bell sounded again, far away, slow, gentle. Ren stared into his cup. How many days had he spent standing among ashes that no longer existed? How many nights had he replayed the fire, the collapse, the loss, the fear? Meanwhile, the present moment had been quietly waiting for him. Like a patient friend, the grey-robed monk stood. "Come." He led them outside. The last light of evening rested upon the temple garden. Small flowers swayed in the breeze. A stone basin reflected the sky. The monk pointed toward a young cedar tree growing beside the wall. It was planted after the fire. Ren looked at it. Its trunk was thin, its branches small. "It isn't as beautiful as the old trees," he said. "No," the monk agreed, "but it is alive, for some reason." Those words touched Ren more deeply than anything else he had heard that day. Not perfect, not finished, not what had been there before. Alive. Sometimes that was enough. Tonight, imagine sitting in that quiet temple garden. The sun is setting. The air smells faintly of cedar and rain. Beside you stands a young tree, not the tree that once stood there, a different tree, a new beginning. Many of us spend years looking backward toward what was lost, a relationship, a dream, a season of life that cannot return. And yet, life continues planting new seeds around us, quietly, patiently, every day. The Buddha taught that suffering often grows when we cling to what has already passed. Not because memories are wrong, but because life only unfolds in the present moment. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, am I grieving something so intensely that I can no longer see what is still growing? Perhaps healing does not mean forgetting the old temple. Perhaps it means learning to appreciate the new one. Before sunrise, they left the temple. The young cedar tree stood quietly beside the wall as they passed. Its small branches trembled in the morning breeze. Ren looked at it one last time, then followed the monk down the mountain path. The air smelled of wet earth. Somewhere below, water moved through the valley. At first, it was only a distant murmur, then a steady rushing sound. Then the broad river appeared through the trees. The flood had passed only a few days earlier. Branches were tangled along the banks. Grass lay flattened where the water had risen. The river itself was still muddy and restless. Brown currents twisted around rocks and fallen logs. Ren stopped beside the bank. It doesn't look peaceful. The monk nodded. No, it looks wounded. They sat on a flat stone, overlooking the water. For a long time, the monk said nothing. He simply watched the river. Ren watched it too. The current seemed confused. Debris spun in circles. Mud clouded everything beneath the surface. Finally, Ren spoke. Will it become clear again? The monk picked up a small pebble and held it in his palm. What do you think? Ren looked at the rushing water. I don't know. The monk dropped the pebble into the river. Ripples spread briefly, then disappeared into the current. The flood has already ended, he said softly. The river simply has not settled yet. Those words lingered in the cool morning air. Ren thought about the fire. The flames were gone. The smoke had vanished. The disaster itself had ended days ago. Yet inside him, everything still felt muddy and unsettled. The monk looked toward the water. Many people expect the heart to become clear immediately after suffering. But hearts are like rivers. After a storm, they need time. A broken branch drifted past them. For a moment it caught against a rock. Then the current slowly carried it onward. When the flood came, the monk continued. Did the river become a different river? Ren shook his head. No. And when it becomes clear again, it will still be the same river. The monk smiled. Exactly. Difficult times may muddy the heart, but they do not erase its true nature. Silence returned. Birds began singing in the reeds along the far bank. Sunlight slowly touched the surface of the water. Ren watched the current more carefully. Near the edge of the river, where the water moved gently, the mud had already begun to settle. He could almost see the stones beneath. Look there, the monk said. What do you notice? The water is clearer near the shore. Why? Ren studied it. Because it is moving more slowly. The monk nodded. Sometimes, healing begins where we stop struggling so hard. Ren lowered his eyes. For days he had fought every feeling. Anger, fear, shame, grief. He had wanted them to disappear immediately. Instead, they had churned inside him like floodwater. The monk reached into the river and filled a small wooden cup. The water was cloudy. He set the cup on the stone between them. Watch. They waited. At first, Nothing changed. Then, almost imperceptibly, the heavier particles began sinking. The upper layer became slightly clearer. "I did nothing," the monk said. "I did not force the mud downward. I only stopped disturbing it." Ren stared at the cup. The lesson felt painfully familiar. "Are you saying I should do nothing?" he asked. The monk smiled gently. "No, I am saying that not every problem is solved by stirring it constantly." The wind moved through the valley. The river continued its endless journey toward the sea. After a long silence, Ren spoke quietly. "I think I've been standing in the middle of the flood." The monk nodded. "And today?" And Ren looked at the wooden cup. "Today I am sitting on the bank." The monk's eyes softened. "That is where clarity begins." By midday, the sun shone brightly across the valley. The river was still muddy, still carrying branches from the storm. Yet somehow it no longer seemed broken. It seemed to be healing in its own time. As they rose to continue their journey, Ren glanced once more at the water. For the first time since the fire, he did not ask when his pain would disappear. He only wondered whether he could learn to let it settle. Tonight, imagine sitting beside that river after the flood. The water is cloudy, branches drift past, the current is still unsettled. Perhaps your own heart has felt this way, after loss, after disappointment, after a season that changed everything. The Buddha often taught that all conditioned things are in motion, even pain, even confusion, even grief. As you breathe slowly tonight, imagine placing a cup of muddy water before you. Notice what happens when you stop shaking it. Notice how clarity begins to return on its own. Not instantly, not dramatically, quietly, patiently, like a river remembering its true nature. By evening they reached a village beside the river. Lanterns hung from wooden poles. Children carried paper lights shaped like cranes and lotus flowers. The air smelled of cedar smoke and sweet rice cakes. Along the riverbank, villagers were preparing for the annual Festival of Lights. Ren watched as an elderly woman carefully placed small candles inside floating lanterns. Each flame flickered in the evening breeze. Some nearly went out, yet she lit them again, one by one, without frustration. The monk stopped beside her. "You are patient," he said. The woman smiled. "The wind is only doing what wind does." She handed Ren an unlit candle. "Will you help me?" Ren hesitated, then knelt beside her. The monk struck a small flint. A single flame appeared. Ren touched his candle to it. His wick caught fire. For a moment, the flame burned steadily. Then a gust of wind swept across the river. The candle went out. Ren sighed. "I knew it." The old woman simply relit it. Another gust came. Again the flame disappeared. Ren looked frustrated. "How do you keep them lit?" The woman cupped her hands around the candle. "I don't fight the wind," she said softly. "I protect the flame." Those words settled quietly inside him. As darkness deepened, more lanterns were lit. One flame touched another, then another, then another. Soon the entire riverbank glowed with warm golden light. Ren noticed something. The first candle had not become smaller by lighting the others. Its flame remained whole. The monk looked at him. "What do you see?" Ren answered slowly. "A single candle can light many others. And what does it lose?" Ren watched the steady flame. "Nothing." The monk nodded. "Compassion is like this. So is courage. So is peace." A child nearby struggled to light her lantern. The wind kept extinguishing the match. Without thinking, Ren moved closer and shielded the flame with his hands. The lantern lit successfully. The child smiled brightly. "Thank you." Then she ran back to her family. Ren stared at his hands. For days he had been consumed by his own suffering. Yet in that brief moment, while helping the child, he had forgotten his troubles entirely. The monk seemed to notice. "When the heart closes around its pain," he said, "the wind feels stronger. When the heart opens to others, the flame grows steadier." Villagers began placing the lanterns onto the river. One by one, they drifted into the current. Hundreds of small lights floated across the dark water. The river that had seemed troubled that morning now carried a moving field of stars. Ren watched them in silence. Some lanterns wobbled. Some turned in circles. A few went out. Most continued drifting downstream. The elderly woman placed the final lantern on the water. "Every year," she said, "some flames survive the journey and some do not. But we light them anyway." "Why?" Ren asked. She looked toward the glowing river. "Because the night is dark." Nothing more needed to be said. The monk turned to Ren. "You have been asking how to survive difficult times." He pointed toward the lanterns. "Perhaps survival is not only about protecting yourself. Perhaps it is also about becoming a small light for someone else." Ren thought of the child's smile. It had lasted only a moment, yet somehow that moment had warmed something inside him that grief could not reach. The wind rose again. Instinctively, Ren cupped his hands around his candle. The flame steadied, not because the wind had stopped, because he had learned how to protect it. Tonight, imagine holding a small candle beside a dark river. The wind moves around you. Life has not suddenly become easy. The storms have not disappeared. Yet within your hands, a small flame continues to burn. The Buddha often taught that peace is not found by controlling every condition around us. It is found by caring for the quality of the heart. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what is the small flame within me that still remains? A kindness, a hope, a moment of gratitude, a willingness to begin again. And who might need a little of that light tomorrow? Remember, a candle does not become smaller when it lights another candle. Sometimes, the brightest moments in difficult seasons come from helping someone else find their way through the dark. Near midnight, they left the river behind. The lanterns had disappeared downstream. Only the moon remained, pale above the fields. Crickets sang in the grass. The air carried the scent of damp soil and freshly cut wood. As they crossed a narrow path between rice paddies, Ren noticed a faint light ahead. An old farmer was working beside a stone wall. Several sections had collapsed after the recent flood. Broken stones lay scattered across the ground. The farmer lifted one stone, placed it carefully, then stepped back to check its balance. His movements were slow but steady. He did not seem bothered by the late hour. The monk greeted him. "You are rebuilding." The farmer smiled without stopping his work. "One stone at a time." Ren looked at the damaged wall. "The flood destroyed this?" "Yes." "How long did it take to build?" The farmer thought for a moment. "About 20 years." Ren stared at him. "And the flood ruined it in one night?" "Yes." The answer was so calm that Ren almost missed it. "Aren't you angry?" he asked. The farmer picked up another stone. The river carried away the wall. He set the stone in place. "My anger would not carry it back." Silence settled between them. The farmer adjusted the stone slightly, then nodded with satisfaction. Ren watched him work. The wall was still mostly broken. The task ahead looked enormous. How long will it take to rebuild? The farmer shrugged. Perhaps a year. That doesn't discourage you? The old man looked genuinely puzzled. Would the wall rebuild itself if I became discouraged? The monk laughed softly. The farmer smiled and continued working. After a while, he handed Ren a stone. Here, place this one. Ren hesitated, then knelt beside the wall. The stone was heavier than it looked. He tried setting it into a gap. It wobbled. The farmer shook his head gently. Turn it. Ren rotated the stone, still unstable. Again, he adjusted it once more. This time it settled firmly into place. The farmer nodded. Good. Ren looked at the single stone he had placed. One stone, nothing more. The wall was still broken. The flood damage was still visible. Yet somehow the wall was now slightly less broken than before. The farmer seemed to read his thoughts. Most people become overwhelmed because they try to rebuild the whole wall in their minds. He picked up another stone. I only rebuild the stone in my hands. Those words struck Ren deeply. Since the fire, he had been trying to solve everything at once. The debts, the business, the future, the shame, the opinions of others, the next 10 years. No wonder his heart felt exhausted. The monk sat quietly on a nearby log. The farmer continued placing stones. Ren found himself helping. One stone, then another, then another. Time passed without anyone noticing. The moon climbed higher. The rebuilt section of wall slowly grew. At last, the farmer set down his tools. Enough for tonight. Ren looked at the repaired section. It was not large, perhaps only a few feet, but it stood solid and straight. You didn't finish, Ren said. The farmer smiled. No, then why stop? Because this was tonight's work. He brushed dirt from his hands. Tomorrow has its own stones. The simplicity of the answer filled the night air. Ren suddenly realized something. The farmer was not rebuilding the wall all at once. He was rebuilding it one evening at a time, one stone at a time, one patient act at a time. As they prepared to leave, the farmer handed Ren a small flat stone. Keep this. Ren looked at it curiously. Why? The farmer smiled. For the days when your own wall feels too large. Ren slipped the stone into his pocket. It felt cool and solid against his palm. When they resumed their journey, he glanced back once more. The old farmer was already extinguishing his lantern. The wall remained unfinished. Yet somehow it no longer seemed impossible. Tonight, imagine standing before a wall damaged by a flood. So many stones have fallen that the task feels overwhelming. Many difficult seasons in life look exactly like this. A relationship to repair, a career to rebuild, a health struggle, a grieving heart. We look at the entire wall and become discouraged before placing the first stone. The Buddha often taught the power of mindful action in the present moment, not the whole journey, not the whole wall, only the stone that is in your hands right now. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what is one small stone I can place tomorrow? A phone call, a healthy meal, a moment of prayer, a single honest step forward. You do not have to rebuild your entire life tonight. You only have to place the next stone with care. Long after midnight, they reached a small roadside shelter. Its roof was old but sturdy. A single lantern hung from a wooden beam. Beyond the shelter, the mountain road disappeared into darkness. The world had become very quiet. The monk set down his pack. Without speaking, he began preparing tea. He poured water into a small iron kettle. placed it over a charcoal flame, waited. Ren watched him. Every movement was unhurried. Nothing seemed wasted. Nothing seemed rushed. After a while, Ren asked, "Do you always make tea like this?" The monk smiled faintly. "How else would I make it?" The kettle began to sing softly. Steam rose into the cold night air. Ren looked down at his hands. For many years, he had drunk tea while counting money, reading ledgers, or planning the next day's work. He could not remember the last time he had truly noticed the tea itself. The monk poured hot water into 2 cups. The fragrance of roasted leaves filled the shelter. He handed 1 cup to Ren. "Drink slowly." Ren obeyed. The tea was warm and slightly bitter. For a few moments, he focused only on the heat of the cup against his palms. The rising steam, the taste, the sound of the charcoal fire. Something unexpected happened. His mind became quiet. Not completely. Thoughts still came and went, but the fire, the debts, the future, and the shame all seemed farther away than before. The monk watched him. "Where is your suffering right now?" Ren looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "In this exact moment," the monk said. "Where is it?" Ren listened. The night breeze, the kettle, the warmth of the tea, his own breathing. The suffering that had filled every hour of the past week was strangely absent for a few seconds. "I don't know," he admitted. The monk nodded. "Most of our suffering lives in yesterday and tomorrow." He tapped the rim of his cup gently. "This tea lives only here." Ren stared into the steaming cup. The monk continued. "You have spent many days standing in the ashes of yesterday, and many nights fearing tomorrow." He took a small sip. "Meanwhile, this moment has been waiting for you." Outside, a breeze moved through the cedar trees. The lantern flickered, but did not go out. Ren drank again, more slowly this time. He noticed the warmth spreading through his chest, the rough texture of the clay cup, the faint scent of smoke in the tea. Nothing in his life had been solved. The debts still existed. The store was still gone. The future was still uncertain. Yet for this brief moment, he was not fighting any of it. The monk smiled gently. "Even on the hardest day," he said, "there is usually one peaceful breath hidden somewhere inside it. Most people are too busy searching for a different life to notice it." Ren lowered his eyes. He thought about the past week, the sunrise he had ignored, the sound of rain on the roof, the kindness of the woman who placed a blanket around his shoulders, the child whose lantern he had helped light. Small moments, quiet moments, moments he had barely noticed because his mind was trapped in the fire. The monk refilled his cup. "When life becomes difficult," he said softly, "do not search immediately for great answers. First, return to the next breath, the next sip of tea, the next sound of the wind, the next step." Ren wrapped both hands around the cup. The warmth felt steady and real. For the first time since the fire, he understood that peace did not always arrive as a dramatic revelation. Sometimes it arrived as a single, mindful moment in the middle of a difficult night. The charcoal fire burned lower. Dawn was still hours away. Neither man hurried to sleep. They simply sat together, sharing tea and silence while the mountain rested around them. Tonight, imagine holding a warm cup of tea in the quiet darkness. The future is uncertain. Some problems remain unsolved. Yet this breath is here. This moment is here. The Buddha often taught that mindfulness is not escaping life. It is returning fully to the life that is already happening. As you breathe slowly tonight, Notice one simple thing around you. The feeling of the blanket against your skin, the sound of a fan, the rhythm of your breathing, the quiet of the room. You do not have to solve your entire life before resting. You do not have to carry tomorrow while lying in bed tonight. For this moment, it is enough to breathe. It is enough to be here. Before dawn, the mountain was silent. The world had not yet decided whether it would become night or morning. A faint grey light rested along the horizon. Ren followed the monk up a narrow ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, the river wound through fields still covered in mist. Village rooftops appeared like small islands in a pale sea. The air was cold enough that each breath became visible. The monk stopped beside a large stone. "Sit," he said. Ren sat. For a while, nothing happened. The valley remained quiet. No birds, no voices, only the slow breathing of the mountain. Ren pulled his cloak tighter. "Are we waiting for something?" The monk smiled faintly. "Yes." More silence. At first, Ren grew restless. His mind drifted toward his unfinished problems, the debts, the rebuilding, the uncertainty waiting for him below. Then a thin line of gold appeared on the eastern horizon. So subtle he almost missed it. The monk pointed. "Look." The light slowly widened. Grey became silver. Silver became pale gold. The mist in the valley began to glow from within. Ren watched without speaking. He had seen countless sunrises in his life, yet he could not remember the last time he had truly watched one. Usually he had been hurrying somewhere, planning, working, worrying. The monk asked quietly, "Did the sun arrive all at once?" Ren shook his head. "No." "How did it arrive?" Ren looked toward the brightening sky. "Little by little." The monk nodded. "Most healing is the same." A bird called from a cedar tree below them, then another. Soon the valley began filling with morning sounds. Life was waking. The sun lifted slowly above the mountains. Its light touched the river, the fields, and the distant temple roofs. The same valley that had looked cold and uncertain moments before now shimmered with warmth. Ren felt something loosen inside his chest. Not because his problems had disappeared, but because he suddenly understood that darkness had not been permanent. The monk looked at him. "During the night," he said softly, "the valley might believe the sun is gone forever, but the sun is already on its way." Ren lowered his eyes. For days he had treated his suffering as though it would last forever, as though the fire had become the whole story of his life. Yet the sunrise was showing him something else. No night remained night forever. Even when the sky looked completely dark, dawn was quietly approaching beyond the horizon. The monk picked up a small pebble and placed it in Ren's palm. "Keep this." Ren looked at it. "Another reminder?" The monk smiled. "Yes." "Of what?" The monk turned toward the rising sun. "That difficult times feel endless while we are inside them, but they are usually changing more than we realize." Ren closed his fingers around the pebble. It felt cool and solid. He looked back, across the valley. The mist that had hidden everything earlier was already disappearing. Fields emerged. Paths appeared. The river became clear. Nothing had been destroyed by the fog. It had only been hidden for a while. The monk stood. "Our journey is nearly finished." Ren rose beside him. For the first time since the fire, he did not feel as though he was walking toward an unknown darkness. He felt as though he was walking into a morning that had been slowly arriving all along. "Tonight Imagine sitting on that mountain ridge before sunrise. The valley below is covered in mist. The sky is still dark. Nothing seems to be changing. Then, almost invisibly, a thin line of light appears. The Buddha often taught that all things are impermanent. This includes joy, and it also includes sorrow. As you breathe slowly tonight, remember a difficult season that once felt endless. Notice how it eventually changed. Notice how a new morning arrived, even if you could not see it at the time. Perhaps the challenge you face now is also moving, little by little, toward a different horizon. Like the sunrise, healing may be happening quietly before you can fully see it. The sun was already high when they reached the lower slopes of the mountain. Ren could see the river winding through the valley below. Beyond it lay his village, the place he had left in despair, the place where the fire had changed everything. For a long time, he walked without speaking. The closer they came, the slower his steps became. The monk noticed. "You are afraid." Ren nodded. "I thought I was ready." "And now?" Ren looked toward the distant rooftops. "Now I don't know what I'll feel when I see it again." The monk smiled gently. "Then let the feeling arrive when it arrives." They continued walking. Children were playing beside the road. A woman hung laundry in the sunlight. A farmer guided an ox through a field. Life had not paused for Ren's suffering. The village had continued breathing while he was away. When they reached the edge of town, a few people recognized him. Some nodded politely. Some looked away awkwardly. Others offered quiet greetings. Ren felt the old embarrassment rise in his chest. The memory of whispers and disappointed voices returned. Then he remembered the bamboo. He took another step. At last, he stood before the remains of his store. The charred beams were still there, the collapsed roof, the blackened doorway. A week earlier, the sight had felt like the end of his life. Now he simply stood and looked. The fire had taken much, but it had not taken the mountains. It had not taken the river. It had not taken his breath. It had not taken his ability to begin again. The monk remained a few steps behind him. He did not interrupt. He allowed Ren to meet the ashes in silence. After a while, Ren walked slowly through the ruined doorway. Sunlight streamed through the broken roof. Dust drifted in the warm air. Near the back wall, he noticed something half buried beneath a fallen beam. A wooden measuring scoop, scorched at the edges, still intact. He picked it up carefully. The wood felt rough and warm from the sun. For a moment, tears filled his eyes, not because of what had been lost, because of what remained. The monk stepped inside. "What do you see?" Ren looked around. He expected the old answer to come automatically. Ashes, ruins, failure. Instead, another answer appeared. "A place where I can start again." The monk nodded. Nothing more. Outside, a breeze moved through the street. A few children stopped to watch him. One little boy pointed at the broken building. "Will you rebuild it?" Ren looked at the child, then at the measuring scoop in his hands, then at the sunlight falling across the floor. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I will." The child smiled and ran off. Ren stood in the middle of the ruins. For the first time since the fire, he did not feel trapped by the past. The old temple monk had been right. If he spent all his time mourning what had burned, he would miss what was still growing. The monk turned toward the street. "What is the first stone?" Ren looked around, then bent down and lifted a fallen board. He carried it outside and set it neatly beside the road. One board, nothing more. The monk smiled. Good. Another board, then another. Slowly, the entrance began to clear. The building was still ruined, yet the work had begun. As afternoon light filled the street, Ren suddenly realized something surprising. The hardest step had not been rebuilding. The hardest step had been returning. Tonight, imagine standing before the place that once caused you the deepest pain. Perhaps it is not a burned store. Perhaps it is a memory, a conversation, a failure, a season of your life you have avoided revisiting. The Buddha taught that healing often begins when we stop running from what happened and meet it with awareness. Not to relive the suffering endlessly, but to see it clearly. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what place in my life have I been afraid to return to? And what if returning is the first step toward rebuilding? Sometimes, courage is not a dramatic act. Sometimes, it is simply walking back through the doorway and lifting the first board. That evening, the village grew quiet. Shops closed. Lanterns were lit. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Yet Ren remained beside the ruins of his store. The monk sat nearby, watching the fading light. Ren carried another broken board outside, then another. His shoulders ached. His hands were dark with soot. The building still looked hopelessly damaged. For a moment, discouragement returned. He looked at the collapsed roof and whispered, "This will take forever." The monk did not answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the western sky. The sun was setting behind the mountains. Did the day become evening all at once? Ren shook his head. No. Then why should rebuilding happen all at once? Ren looked back at the ruins. The question softened something inside him. The next morning, he began again. Not with grand plans, not with calculations about the next 10 years. Only with the first board. He sorted what could still be used. He stacked salvageable timber. He swept ash from the floor. By midday, a small section of the entrance was clear. By evening, sunlight could reach the back wall. It was not much, yet it was more than yesterday. On the third day, an old carpenter passed by. He stopped, looked at the stacks of wood, and nodded. "You kept the good boards." "I'm trying," Ren replied. The carpenter picked up a hammer from his belt. "Then let me help with the roof supports." They worked together in silence. Wood against wood, hammer against nail. The sound echoed through the street like a slow heartbeat. On the fourth day, a young neighbor brought a bundle of rope. "My father said, you might need this." On the fifth day, a woman arrived with a basket of food. "You forgot to eat yesterday," she said. Ren realized something. When he had hidden inside his despair, he had believed he was alone. When he began rebuilding, people began appearing. One afternoon, he found the small, flat stone the farmer had given him. It was still in his pocket. He placed it on a shelf near the doorway, a reminder, one stone at a time. The monk visited each evening. Sometimes he spoke, often he did not. One night, he noticed Ren staring at the unfinished walls. "What do you see?" Ren sighed. "Everything that still needs to be done." The monk walked to the entrance. He pointed to the repaired roof beam, then to the cleared floor, then to the rebuilt doorway. "And what do you not see?" Ren was silent. The monk smiled gently. "Progress hides behind our impatience." That night, Ren remained alone in the store after the monk left. Moonlight entered through the unfinished roof. He looked around carefully. The building was still damaged. Yet it no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a workshop in the middle of becoming something. For the first time, he imagined customers returning, children laughing outside, rice stacked on the shelves. not as a desperate dream, as a possibility. He sat on an overturned crate and closed his eyes. The fire had taken his old store, but it had also stripped away something else, the illusion that life could be controlled completely. Now, each board he lifted felt different. Not a battle against the past, a conversation with the future. Outside, the village bell sounded the evening hour. Ren opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Tomorrow there would be more boards, more dust, more work. And somehow, that no longer frightened him. Tonight, imagine standing inside a building that is only half rebuilt. There are still gaps in the roof. Tools lie scattered across the floor. The work is unfinished. Many lives feel this way. We are not where we were, and we are not yet where we hope to be. The Buddha often reminded his students that transformation is a process, not a single moment. As you breathe slowly tonight, notice one small area of your life that has already changed. Perhaps you are more patient than before. Perhaps you are more honest. Perhaps you have survived something you once thought would destroy you. Progress may not look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like one repaired beam, one cleared floor, one more day of continuing. And that is enough. Several days passed. The rebuilt doorway stood straight. 2 roof beams had been repaired. The floor was clean enough to walk across without stepping over ashes. Each morning, Ren began work at sunrise. Each evening, he stopped when the village bell sounded. The work was slow, yet something inside him had become steadier. One afternoon, while he was repairing a shelf, he heard footsteps behind him. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, holding a sack of rice. Ren recognized her immediately. Years earlier, during a harsh winter, he had allowed her family to buy food on credit when they had no money. She set the sack down. "I heard you were rebuilding." Ren shook his head. "You don't need to bring this." The woman smiled. "I know." Before he could answer, she bowed gently and left. Ren stood quietly beside the sack of rice. He had forgotten that winter. To him, it had been a small kindness. To someone else, it had become a memory carried for years. The next morning, a fisherman arrived with fresh river fish. "For your meals while you work," he said. On the same day, a young man brought a bundle of firewood. "My father said you once repaired our cartwheel for free." Ren could barely remember these things. They had seemed ordinary at the time. Small acts, brief moments, nothing he had expected to see again. By the end of the week, the corner of the store had filled with gifts: rice, rope, wood, tools, vegetables, tea. No one made a speech. No one called it charity. People simply arrived, left something behind, and returned to their lives. That evening, the monk visited as usual. He looked around the store and smiled. "Your granary is becoming less empty." Ren laughed softly. For the first time in many days, the sound surprised him. "I didn't know so many people remembered me," he admitted. The monk sat on a repaired crate. Kindness has a long memory. Ren lowered his eyes. "I thought I had lost everything." The monk looked at the sacks of rice, the bundles of wood, the repaired beams. "You lost many things," he said gently, "but not the seeds you planted in other people's lives." Those words settled deeply inside him. Later that night, Ren sat alone near the doorway. The village was quiet. Moonlight rested across the floorboards. He thought back over the years. The winter credit, the repaired cart, the extra bag of rice he had once given a struggling family. the cup of tea shared with a tired traveler. None of those moments had seemed important. Yet somehow they had survived the fire. The next day brought another visitor. A middle-aged carpenter entered carrying a set of tools. "I heard your roof still leaks," he said. Ren nodded. "A little." The carpenter set down the tools. "Then let's fix it properly." As they worked, Ren finally asked the question that had been growing in his heart. "Why are people helping me?" The carpenter tightened a beam before answering. "Because years ago, when my workshop burned, someone helped me." He looked up and smiled. "Kindness travels." Ren stood very still. The words felt like a bell echoing through everything he had learned on the mountain. The candle that lights another candle. The few grains that begin a new harvest. The cracked bowl that still holds warmth. Nothing had truly been isolated. Everything was connected. By sunset, the roof no longer leaked. The carpenter packed his tools. Before leaving, he placed a small wooden plaque above the doorway. On it were carved 3 simple words: "Begin again. Today." Ren touched the smooth wood, then bowed deeply. As darkness settled over the village, he stepped outside and looked back at the store. It was still smaller than before, still unfinished, still carrying the scars of the fire. Yet, it no longer looked lonely. It looked held. Tonight, imagine a doorway slowly filling with unexpected gifts. A sack of rice, a bundle of wood, a helping hand. Many of us believe that our small acts disappear once they are done. But the Buddha taught that every intentional action leaves a trace, a kind word, a moment of patience, a gesture of generosity. We may forget these things. Life often remembers them. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what seeds have I already planted without realizing it? Perhaps some are quietly growing in places you cannot see. Perhaps someone carries a memory of your kindness, even now. And perhaps, in your own difficult season, those seeds will find their way back to you. Autumn arrived quietly. The air grew cooler. Leaves began turning gold along the riverbanks. By now, much of the store had been rebuilt. The roof held against the wind. The shelves stood straight again. A few customers had already returned. One evening, dark clouds gathered over the valley. Rain began suddenly. Heavy drops struck the wooden shutters. Water rushed through the streets in silver streams. Ren closed the front door and lit a small lamp. For a moment, the sound of rain pulled him backward in time. He remembered the night of the fire, the shouting, the smoke, the collapsing roof. His chest tightened. The old fear stirred again. He stood motionless beside the counter. The rain hammered against the roof. His thoughts began racing. What if another disaster comes? What if I lose everything again? What if this rebuilding is only temporary? Then, through the storm, a distant sound reached him. A temple bell. One deep note. Slow, steady, unhurried. Ren closed his eyes. The bell sounded again. For several breaths, he simply listened. The rain was still falling. The wind was still moving. Nothing outside had changed. Yet something inside him began to settle. He remembered the river after the flood, the muddy water, the wooden cup left undisturbed. Clarity had returned not through force, but through stillness. Another bell echoed across the valley. Ren walked slowly to the doorway. He opened it a crack. Cold, rain-scented air entered the store. The street shimmered beneath the storm. In the distance, beyond the river, the temple lanterns glowed faintly through the rain. He stood there listening. bell, rain, wind, breath. For the first time, he noticed that the bell did not compete with the storm. It did not try to silence the rain. It simply sounded clearly within it. The realization arrived gently. Peace was not the absence of difficult circumstances. Peace was the ability to hear the bell even while the storm continued. Ren smiled faintly. All these weeks, he had been waiting for life to become completely safe before allowing himself to rest. But life had never promised perfect safety. The bamboo still bent in the wind. Rivers still flooded, bowls still cracked, walls still fell, and yet people continued planting seeds, lighting candles, rebuilding homes, and sharing tea. The bell sounded once more. Its tone lingered in the rainy night. Ren took a slow breath. The fear that had risen inside him was not gone completely, but it no longer controlled him. It was simply another sound in the storm. He closed the door gently and returned to the counter. Instead of pacing, he brewed a small pot of tea. He sat beside the lamp and listened. Rain on the roof, steam rising from the cup, the distant bell, his own breathing. Outside, the storm gradually softened. The rain became lighter. The wind slowed. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the moon waited quietly. Ren realized something else. The bell had been ringing all along. He simply had not been listening. Tonight, imagine standing inside that small store while rain falls outside. The storm is real. The uncertainty is real. Yet somewhere in the distance, a temple bell sounds. The Buddha often taught that suffering becomes heavier when we believe peace can exist only after every problem disappears. But life is rarely free of wind and rain. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, what is the bell in my own life? A moment of gratitude, a prayer, a loved one's voice, the sound of my breathing, the quiet awareness that I am still here. Notice that the bell does not remove the storm. It simply reminds you that something deeper remains steady beneath it. Perhaps peace is not waiting at the end of all difficulty. Perhaps it is already ringing softly within the life you have now. Morning arrived clear and bright. The storm had washed the village clean. Sunlight rested on the wet rooftops. Small pools of water reflected the sky like pieces of glass. Ren opened the rebuilt shutters of his store. Cool autumn air flowed inside. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing. The smell of fresh wood had replaced the smell of smoke. As he arranged a few sacks of rice near the entrance, he noticed a traveler approaching. The man carried a worn bundle across his shoulder. His clothes were dusty from the road. His eyes looked tired in a way that had little to do with walking. He stopped at the doorway. "Is this store open?" Yes, Ren replied. The traveler hesitated. "I don't have much money." Ren smiled gently. "What do you need?" The man looked around uncertainly. "A little rice," he said, "and perhaps some tea." Ren measured the rice into a small sack. As he did, he noticed the traveler's hands trembling slightly. Not from cold, from exhaustion. "You've been traveling a long way," Ren said. The man nodded. "I left my village 3 weeks ago." "Why?" The traveler lowered his eyes. "A flood took my home." The words hung quietly in the air. Ren stopped measuring. For a moment, he saw himself as he had been after the fire. The same emptiness, the same disbelief, the same question hidden behind tired eyes. "I don't know what to do now," the traveler admitted. "Everything I built is gone." Ren set down the scoop. Without thinking, He reached into his pocket and felt the small, flat stone the farmer had given him. He remembered the bamboo field, the cracked bowl, the fog, the river, the candle, the sunrise. The monk had once carried those lessons to him. Now, unexpectedly, another weary traveler stood before him. Ren poured 2 cups of tea. He handed one to the man. "Sit," he said. They sat near the doorway where sunlight warmed the floorboards. For a while, neither spoke. The traveler wrapped both hands around the cup. Finally, he whispered, "How do you start again?" Ren looked around the rebuilt store. Then he answered slowly, "At first, I thought I needed to rebuild my whole life." He smiled faintly. That was too heavy to carry. The traveler listened. "Then an old farmer taught me something." Ren placed the flat stone on the table between them. He said most people become overwhelmed because they try to rebuild the whole wall in their minds. But they only need to rebuild the stone in their hands. The traveler's gaze rested on the stone. "And what is the stone in my hands?" Ren thought for a moment. "Today, yes, today, perhaps it is eating a meal, resting, finding a place to sleep. Tomorrow may bring another stone." The man was silent for a long time. Then tears filled his eyes. "Everyone keeps asking me what my plan is," he said. "I don't even know how to get through today." Ren nodded. "Then don't begin with a year. Begin with today." Outside, a breeze moved through the street. A few golden leaves drifted past the doorway. The traveler took a slow breath. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Not because his problems had disappeared. Because someone had finally stopped asking him to solve his entire future at once. After finishing his tea, he reached for his money. Ren gently shook his head. "Keep it." "I can't." "You can." Ren placed the sack of rice into the man's hands. Then he added a small packet of tea leaves. "For tonight." The traveler looked at him in surprise. "Why are you helping me?" Ren glanced toward the rebuilt doorway. He thought of the rice, the rope, the wood, the hands that had helped him. Then he smiled, because difficult times are easier when someone shares the weight. The man bowed deeply. Before leaving, he picked up the flat stone and tried to return it. Ren closed his hand around it. "No," he said softly, "I still need this reminder." The traveler laughed quietly through his tears. Then he walked back into the sunlit street carrying rice, tea, and perhaps a little less despair than before. Ren watched him disappear down the road. Only then did he understand the final lesson. The mountain journey had never been only for him. The bamboo, the river, the candle, the farmer, the bell, all of it had been preparing him for this ordinary morning, for the moment when another human being would arrive carrying a burden too heavy to hold alone. The monk appeared quietly at the doorway. "What did you learn?" he asked. Ren looked at the empty cups on the table, then at the street where the traveler had gone. "I learned that difficult times do not come only to break us," he smiled. "Sometimes they come to teach us how to help someone else." The monk bowed his head slightly. "That was the lesson you needed most." Tonight, imagine a weary traveler standing at your doorway. He has lost something important. He does not know how to begin again. Notice that Ren does not give him a grand speech. He gives him tea, rice, a place to sit, and one simple truth. You do not have to rebuild your whole life today. The Buddha often taught that compassion is not merely a feeling. It is a willingness to share another person's burden, even for a moment. As you breathe slowly tonight, ask yourself, Who has helped carry my burden during difficult times, and whose burden might become a little lighter because of my presence tomorrow? Perhaps the wisdom gained through suffering is not meant to stay hidden inside us. Perhaps it is meant to become a small refuge for others. That evening, after the traveler departed, Ren closed the rebuilt shutters and stepped outside. The village had grown quiet. Lanterns glowed behind paper windows. Somewhere a mother was singing softly to a child. The river carried moonlight between the fields. Ren walked to the edge of the bridge, overlooking the water. He leaned against the wooden railing and looked at the dark current moving beneath him. The same river that had been muddy after the flood. The same river that had carried lanterns through the night. The same river that never stopped flowing. For a long time, he simply listened. Water, wind, distant insects in the reeds, his own breathing. The moon rose higher above the valley. Its reflection trembled across the river's surface. Ren reached into his pocket. One by one, he placed the objects he had carried during his journey on the bridge beside him. The flat stone from the farmer, the pebble from the sunrise ridge, the small piece of cedar wood he had found in the ashes. Simple things. Ordinary things, yet each held a lesson. He thought of the bamboo bending in the storm, the empty granary, the cracked bowl glowing with gold, the fog that hid the path, the monk who lost his temple, the river after the flood, the candle in the wind, the wall rebuilt one stone at a time, the tea shared in silence, the sunrise that arrived slowly, the people who returned, the bell that sounded through the rain, the traveler who needed a place to rest. Each lesson had seemed separate. Now they began joining together like streams flowing into one river. Ren suddenly realized that the fire had not been the true center of the story. The true center had been what emerged afterward. If the fire had never happened, he would have continued running through his days, counting profits, planning more years, waiting for some future moment when life would finally begin. Instead, loss had stopped him. It had forced him to see what he had been overlooking all along: the warmth of tea, the sound of rain, the kindness of strangers, the patience of farmers, the resilience of bamboo, the quiet miracle of another sunrise. A temple bell echoed across the valley, one deep note, then silence. Ren smiled. He no longer heard the bell as a distant sound. He heard it as a reminder. Life was happening now, not after everything became perfect. Now. The monk's footsteps approached behind him. Ren did not turn around. "I think I understand," he said softly. The monk stood beside him. "What do you understand?" Ren looked at the moonlit river. "I spent my whole life trying to build a future where I could finally be at peace." He touched the piece of cedar wood. But peace was never waiting at the end of the road. It was hidden in the road itself. The monk's eyes reflected the moonlight. "And what will you do now?" Ren thought carefully. Then he answered, "I will rebuild my store. I will work. I will make mistakes. I will lose things again someday." He smiled faintly. "And I will still drink tea, watch the sunrise, help travelers, and listen for the bell." The monk bowed his head slightly. "Then the fire has already finished its work." They stood together in silence. Above them, clouds drifted slowly across the moon. Below them, the river continued its endless journey toward the sea. After a while, the monk turned to leave. At the end of the bridge, he paused. "Ren." "Yes?" "When the next difficult season comes." "And it will." Ren nodded. "I know." The monk smiled. "What will you remember?" Ren looked at the objects on the railing, then at the river, then at the moon. I will remember that storms pass, rivers clear, walls can be rebuilt, candles can be relit, and even a broken bowl can still hold warmth. The monk's smile widened. Without another word, he walked back toward the village. Ren remained on the bridge a little longer. The night air was cool against his face. For the first time since the fire, he felt no need to ask why it had happened. The question had quietly dissolved. He gathered the small objects and placed them back in his pocket. Then he took one final look at the moonlit river and began walking home. Tonight, imagine standing on that bridge beside the river. The storm has passed. The moon is reflected in the water. In your pocket are the small reminders gathered from every difficult season you have survived. The Buddha taught that life is constantly changing. Nothing stays the same. Not joy, not sorrow, not success, not loss. As you breathe slowly tonight, remember the lessons of the journey. Bend when the storm is strong. Notice what still remains. Allow your cracks to become places of wisdom. Take the next step even in the fog. Carry suffering with gentleness. Let troubled waters settle. Protect the flame within you. Rebuild one stone at a time. Find refuge in the present moment. Trust that dawn arrives slowly. Return to the places that hurt. Begin again with patience. Let kindness travel through the world. Listen for the bell within the storm. Become a refuge for others. And perhaps the deepest lesson of all, difficult times do not always come to destroy us. Sometimes they come to show us what cannot be destroyed. As sleep gently approaches, let that understanding settle like clear water after a flood. The night is quiet. The river is flowing. The bell is still ringing somewhere in the distance. And within your own heart, a small flame continues to burn.